The names and traits of video game characters are two things that become deeply entrenched in our minds when we experience playing through a game. And when it comes to a prominent franchise of games, the regular characters are essentially expected to help us back into the world we're familiar with each time we go visit it once again. And while certain character traits can and will evolve over time, gamers generally expect that as part of the natural progression of a series, character development, and really the capabilities of gaming in general. What isn't expected though is the complete changing of a main character's name from a video game series as time goes on. For a character that has appeared in at least a handful of games under a name we become well accustomed to early on, having that name changed years down the road puts more than just a few of us in an awkward spot of feeling like we're surrounded by noobs who don't know the true name of a character. Or if you take a false sense of elitism out of the picture, it's, if nothing else, just an odd feeling identity crisis. Now, I get that localization and translation apparently plays into this all, and that's undoubtedly going to be somewhat of a running theme on this list, short as the list may be. Even if it's true that localization teams change the names of certain characters upon their English version adaptation of games, why is it that it seemed to happen more often with characters whose names might be longer or somewhat more difficult to pronounce for some people? And another issue I have with believing that is, how did the teams manage to get every other character's name perfectly correct? If nothing else, why wouldn't there have been some kind of phone call made overseas to confirm the name of a game's main character if there was any ambiguity at all over what it actually was? Either way, when enough history in a game or gaming franchise has already been written, those names and core traits of characters are going to stick forever with those who have been there since the beginning. And whatever reasoning a developer might have had for a major name change, in my opinion, will always be flawed. There are certain ones that stand out to me much more than others, so with all that said, here are 3 name changes in gaming that should have never happened. Final Fantasy VII is arguably the best game from one of gaming's biggest franchises. And while the stories for each game generally don't come with much of any crossover to other games in the series, the impact of this particular character in this particular game is undeniably iconic within video game history. Shock and awe is a pretty accurate description of my own and probably plenty of other people's reaction to the build-up and climax of the encounter with Sephiroth in the City of Ancients. Aeris is a character that everybody mourned over based both on that shock and awe, but also on the attachment we'd already built up throughout the story in this game up to that point. That, and she's just a very important piece in general to this game that is such a classic to so many people. So, while getting bugged by as simple a change from Aeris to Aerith is admittedly maybe petty, my memories of playing this game don't include any part about dealing with the heart-wrenching loss of Aerith. The memory for most of us is of the journey with and eventual loss of Aeris, or Ares, however you chose to pronounce it. And while this change might hold the most water when it comes to the localization and translation argument of character names, if a mistake was made from the start, roll with that mistake instead of trying to rewrite history to satisfy a small bit of negligence by the developers. Some mistakes are okay simply being left as they were. This one, while not the most annoying to me, is kind of just weird. For the better part of a decade in the Sonic series, the villain at large was Dr. Robotnik. This included a handful of classic games, 3 different cartoon series, and the original comic book series. But then, for some reason, his name was suddenly Dr. Eggman. What in the actual hell is up with this change? His name used to sound menacing and evil. Now it just sounds like a cheap fat joke. And while I have read things claiming that Robotnik was a result of a translation mistake, I call bullshit on that. To me, this seems to be entirely a result of somebody feeling that Robotnik was too hard to read or pronounce. Probably especially for younger gamers that Sega had hoped to capture back then, and they went with something a lot simpler and maybe even slightly visually applicable. Whatever the reasoning for this one, they got it wrong. But for what it's worth, this would be far from the last time that the Sonic the Hedgehog series was grossly mishandled. You probably could have seen this coming from a mile away to be tops on this ever so short list, but it's always bothered the hell out of me as somebody who grew up playing the original NES Mario games and obsessing over every episode of all 3 of the Super Mario Bros. Cartoons during their time on the air. Princess Toadstool was the princess of the Mushroom Kingdom, where the Toads lived. Her name was fitting to both her royalty and her people. Again, I've heard the translation and localization argument on this name change, and it's least believable here given the significance of her name I just mentioned. And that's without even bringing up how protective of its brands Nintendo generally has been. So it's tough to imagine that throughout all these early games of her being referred to as Princess Toadstool, as well as on the cartoons on TV, that nobody along the line would have seen this and been like, whoa, guys, her name is Peach, not Princess Toadstool. And much like my speculation with Dr. Robotnik, I think this was almost entirely due to marketability among toddlers that Nintendo had hoped to have their games topping Christmas wish lists every year. There also were probably focus groups and market research studies that concluded having just a one-syllable nickname like Peach was much more identifiable and relatable to people than understanding the significance of or pronouncing the 4 syllables of Princess Toadstool. Whatever the actual reasoning, it's tried to overwrite a lot of the early history of Nintendo that so many of us cherished as part of our childhoods. Enough so to where these name changes still stand as something at least somewhat agitating to this day. And it all makes me wonder what the point of it was in the end if the now somewhat older generation of gamers were able to understand and grow used to names like Robotnik and Toadstool. We're still here all these years later, so with some of the biggest franchises that helped grow gaming into what it is today, why rewrite some of that history that we all experienced together during that growth? Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you have any name changes in video game history that impacted you in any way, please feel free to share them in the comments below. If you like this video, please click that thumbs up button below. And if you want more videos like it, please click subscribe. Thanks again for watching, everybody.